everyone. Welcome to the Contech Exec Podcast. Today, my guest is Andy Bergmann. Andy and I met via LinkedIn. I think I responded to one of his posts, and he and I just kind of struck up a conversation after that. So we're going to talk about this today. Andy, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, Robert.
Yeah, not a problem, man. We talked about doing this. We had a nice conversation. When we met, we had a phone conversation. I was interested in Mavix and what you do in the coaching field of construction, because I'm sure that's a difficult task. Just, briefly here, kind of give me a little bit of background on what Mavix does and kind of how that's going.
Yeah, it's going all right. So what I do is I provide training to blue collar folks. People ask, what do you train on? I train communication. So what does that mean? I teach people what to say and how to say it when it gets uncomfortable. So this could be a project manager trying to negotiate change orders and back charges. It could be a foreman trying to have difficult conversations with guys on site, apprentices, other journeymen. It could be on the team, guys on the job site not getting along. It could be disputes between project managers and foremen. And there's all kinds of scenarios, especially in the construction world, where difficult conversations are needed. And so I help them have them without making things blow up or creating more drama.
Right. Yeah. Well, we all know that happens. There's always a little bit of drama on a construction site, probably more than most people would recognize. But there's a lot of, I'll say, spectacular characters, in the job field, in the construction world. Right. There's all kinds.
Hey, you need a little bit of drama to keep it fun.
Well, yeah, it'd be boring if it, but yeah. There's, in my lifetime, in my 30 years in the experience, I've come across plenty of characters in my line of work. And it didn't matter whether it was in the blue collar area where we were working. We were always working with different attitudes, different opinions, different backgrounds, even in the GC world, when you're going project management or, contract negotiation, there's a need for good communication, right? Because negative communication, and from my opinion, it produces no fruit, right? It doesn't really work. It only, widens the cavern, or whatever it just widens that gap between finding a solution. So you and I, when we first started talking about this, I remember the post that I replied to. You had talked about there was somebody that you were working with. The guy was a pipe fitter welder, or welder pipe fitter. The job description was very, very, basically clear, in that at the point in time when the guy took the job, or the person took the job, it was really clear that, guess what, you were going to be doing some welding, you're going to do some pipe fitting. That's kind of what the job required. And then suddenly you found out, day one, guy got on the job. No, I ain't doing that. I'm a welder. I don't fit pipe, right? And then suddenly it's just what happened, right? And so I responded to that, and I said, yeah, that's pretty typical in those types of things. You can't necessarily guarantee character. Everybody wants a job, but then it starts to smell a lot like work once they have it, right? So, and tell me about that and what you're dealing with on that level.
Yeah. So, in that scenario, if anyone's familiar with the pipe fitting and welding world, a lot of times those roles are separated at companies. And so they'll have just pipe fitters and just welders, and they do their own work. Well, the way we had it structured is it was all one position. And so that's how we advertised it, and that's how we had set the expectations. And for whatever reason, he didn't like it or didn't want to do it, or he was confused, and he said, that's not my job. I'm not doing that. That's when the foreman had laid him out that morning to do the work. And it was on his first day of work, too. We just hired him. And the thing is, culture isn't what you say, it's what you tolerate, or it's what you put up with. And so if you're willing to put up with that type of behavior, or you let guys do that, well, then it's just going to spread. And so the next guy down the line that doesn't want to do a certain task, he's going to say that too. I don't want to do that. And so In that situation, we ended up letting him go that same day. Uh, the foreman and management weren't willing to put up with it. So tough call, but I mean, the guy was talented. I mean, it was clear he had the skills to do it, but it wasn't worth keeping him around.
Yeah, so I feel like we're in an age where it wasn't. I was speaking to. I think we were at a restaurant. My wife and I were at a restaurant one time. It's been maybe a year or 2 years ago now. The manager came up. We were getting some really. It was some bad service, right? It was, and I know this is kind of not in that realm of blue collar, but it's I think it's the same type of mentality that I think we're just still dealing with today. Is the employees seem to be feel more empowered to say, hey, this is what I'm not going to do. Even though it may be part of the job or it may be something a little bit extra to the job. And it seems like we're dealing with that a lot because this manager actually said, he goes, yeah, I can't really, I need the help. And I said, and it confused me because I was like, well, you need the help. You need help like that. That's going to turn away, not only other people that want to come work for you, but it's going to turn away clients or customers because you've got kind of a toxic work environment where you're the people that are supposed to be working specific jobs and specific tasks they're just picking and choosing. I mean, that seems to me is it a culture shift, do you think? Do you think it's an ideal shift of some sort where employees just feel like, hey, I'm just not going to do it? Or is it a small percentage and I'm just blowing that?
No, I think it's common. I think there's probably several different reasons for that. I think oftentimes leaders struggle to hold people accountable or like hold their feet to the fire because they don't want to lose them and they need the manpower. And so they say, I need the help. I think those leaders are just lacking the skill to hire good people. Hiring is no different. It's just a form of marketing. We have to market our business to get customers. And as a business owner, you also have to market your company to get employees. And so if you are hiring people out of desperation and then when you try to hold them accountable, they just get pushed back and say, I'm not going to do it. And you let that happen. Well, then again, culture isn't what you say, it's what you tolerate. And so you're basically passively saying that it's okay to do the thing.
Yeah, I think construction has long been guilty, and when I say construction, skilled trades has long
Yeah.
been guilty of kind of the mass hire. Let's go back to the hall. We'll find a few more guys, just replace whoever we've got, and then weed out. From there we just kind of weed out who's going to fit, who's not. It's not really a hiring process it's a gathering process, right? There's we'll get five more folks, we'll bring them in, you know, try them out first day, first week. And one of the big things that I heard from, some of my clients when they start talking about putting on new people is, some of these folks, you put a lot of effort into them and they don't last a week. They were never going to fit and were never going to work in the first place. So it's like a waste of time. So when I think about it and, I think about, my days, I always tried to hire people that got referred to me. I had a friend of my buddy's got a guy, he's, carpenter or whatever, painter or whatever, those kind of things we were doing at the time. He's a good guy. Okay. Bring him on. Let's try that out. The interview process, wasn't really detailed. Now you would know more about, today because that's kind of, back in the day, but tell me a little bit more about what that interview process now looks like for, a blue collar worker and what to expect.
Yeah. I think it totally depends. You mentioned getting people from the hall. I'm assuming that's with union. A lot of my experiences with non-union shops, and every company is a little bit different. Typically, in my experience, I mean, an ad will go out, people will apply for it online, and then there's some sort of interview process, starting with a phone interview, and then goes into an in-person interview. You meet in person. Oftentimes, like when we were hiring pipe fitters and welders, we would have some sort of welding test where they would have to uh, do a pipe weld and it would basically have to pass. So one question that comes up that I think is interesting is people will say you should hire for around like character or around culture fit, and then you can train them on the expertise. What I've been thinking about is, can you train character?
No, never heard that you can train character. I've always hired for character. Skill was something that gets into that training thing where you can train skill, you can't train character. Like you're not going to change the zebra stripes, right? Most of that kind of thing, especially when it comes to character, integrity, honesty, those types of things. That's stuff that, is you're not going to change it as an employer. Maybe if you were a mentor to somebody, early on that maybe struggled with a few things and then kind of you were a mentor that they kind of changed their ways. But again, most of the time, you have to hire for character, because skill can be trained.
Yeah. That's it's interesting because if we say we can't hire for character, first, how do we define what is character?
Yeah, yeah. It might be obviously, is it an intuitive feel, right? In the interview process, do you get the good feel about it? Can they give examples of those types of things? Are those questions, allowed, or will they answer them, correctly or honestly? I guess you do take a chance on whether they're just, absolutely lying about themselves. Like this guy that we're talking about here, that pipe fitter slash welder. Uh, was it a bit disingenuous for him to take the job and think that he was then going to dictate um, his position? Is that good character, bad character? I, I think my comment to in your post was, now you know why he was looking for a job in the first place.
No, for sure. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the training part. I deal a lot on the technology side of the world in construction, and I want people to pick the right technologies for their companies, right? I want to help them decide, hey, this is good for your environment. You can train this easily, but there are steps to make that happen. In that training part, I think is the big thing. There's a lot of construction companies out there that don't spend enough time in their training, and they're seeing ill results, not only whatever from software use or even from just basic tool use or functionality, because they think it's too big of an expense. But really, on the back end of things, yeah, you're going to have some people that you train up and then they end up go work for somebody else. That's the price to play the game, right? That's the chance that you take. But I'd say more often than not, if trained properly, and I think this is what you can address. If trained properly, they're going to stick around and they're going to be a good asset. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I've heard a quote that, I mean, train train your people and they might leave, but what might be worse is you don't train them and they stay. So I mean, you can decide not to train people, but then do you want untrained or unskilled people at your company anyway? Yeah, training. I think the reason why what companies often don't invest tons in training is because it's difficult to measure the input of money into training versus the output or the ROI. It's difficult to make that correlation. If I spend 20 time training, how much am I saving or gaining?
Yeah, it's soft cost, right? It's
It is.
it's soft cost is a risk, but soft cost is also real. And this is exactly one of those areas. Training, right? And you hear the stories that you hear, and I'm sure you've heard more than I, but you got horror stories, right? And then you've got the great stories, right? I'm sure you've got a few examples of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can even think for myself when I have invested in training for myself. Like I have paid for training and I felt like it was a waste of time or I didn't get, even for me personally, the ROI wasn't there. And so if any individual has experience doing that, a business owner, and you pay 5,000, you pay $20,000 for training and it kind of feels like very mediocre, well, then it's going to feel even more risky to invest in training in the future.
Yeah. You get burned once and you feel like this next one is going to be, you're going to get burned again. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with training is interesting because if I had to think about how do I define learning, when you learn something, it's the same condition but a different behavior. And so it's one thing just to take in new knowledge, but to change your behavior is a whole nother thing. And so if I work with an entire team and I knowledge dump a whole bunch of things on them, that's very little value to the company. But if I knowledge dump and there's behavior change, then that's super valuable. Or I think a lot of trainings, they give you some information and they hope you implement it. But if you have the same behavior, your behavior didn't change,
Yes.
then did learning really even happen?
It's the Charles Duhigg book about habits. They've got, some of them have good habits, some of them have bad habits. Getting them to adjust a bad habit, a way that they perform, a way that they do things, is probably the hardest thing that anybody ever does. It's the same reason why people don't stick to diets, or people don't, you know, go exercise every day, or they don't, read something every day. They're not into self improvement, right? Change is scary. They don't know what's on the outcome of it. And it works not only at the executive level when people are looking at, how I'm going to move this behemoth of a company that I've got, if it's a large company or even a small level, how am I going to move all these people into this new process? But studies show that one of the biggest issues with, loss in your company is the fact that your people aren't performing, um, the right tasks at the right time. They haven't been trained properly to make those decisions. There's no accountability level. In some instances, they don't know that they've made a mistake, or they don't know how to handle a mistake, which again goes back to what you do, which is teaching people how to communicate when the conversation is tough. Because we'll be trained in this system that says the mistakes are bad, right? But unfortunately, the truth is mistakes aren't bad. It's how you react to them that can be bad or good, right? And most people don't know how to react to mistakes. Most get angry. They start to blame. They try to shift the focus off themselves. Everybody wants the attaboy, right? Everybody wants that. And especially I'll say in the blue collar realm of the world, like, they don't want the spotlight, right? What they want to do is they want to go to work for their 8. They want to get their stuff done, and they want to go home and, be with their family, or, you know, do what they do in their off time. Work is work, and we work to go play.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I think it's accountability often gets a negative slant on it because I think people correlate accountability with blame. If I'm going to hold someone accountable, I'm essentially blaming them for it. But I think you can hold somebody accountable by simply, I mean, what you're doing when you're holding someone accountable, you're holding them to something they already agreed to do before, and you're just reminding them of their agreement. And it can be done without blame. It can be done without consequence. You don't have to get them in trouble. It's just a reminder. And of course, if there's a pattern or it keeps going on a long period of time, yeah, you might need to do consequences or take more action. But it doesn't have to be of like a blaming nature.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think it goes more to how you deliver the message, right? Rather than, when or never delivering the message. There are things that need to be addressed, and it's how you say it. I was like, there's that meme that's kind of out there that says, I know my dad was right, back in the day, but it was just how he said it, really made me mad.
Mhm.
And I can, I've been there. My dad and I probably butted heads several times over the fact that he was right, and I just didn't like the way he said it.
Mhm. What do you think that is? What is it about how people say things that we don't like or get turned off by?
I think it's an internal reaction. Again, nobody wants the spotlight. Nobody wants to be held accountable. They don't want the light shine on them when there's a mistake. And so they immediately become defensive, right? It's the old adage of the truth will set you free, but it'll piss you off first. Nobody, Everybody wants truth, but they don't want the truth about them, right? So when even today, I don't like it. If I make a mistake, I know it's a learning experience, but I don't like the uncomfortableness of it. It is uncomfortable, right? So what it is, it's an internal response to kind of protect yourself a little bit, try to protect your ego, or whatever that is. And that is very, very hard. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that when you start to talk about, you can give them a bunch of knowledge, but can they use it to make change, right? To make a change, to be better, to improve their result. And I think that's the biggest thing about, especially in our industry. You want to improve, but you have to give folks the steps to improvement, because I don't think it's always intuitive. I don't think we recognize how powerful our bad habits are.
I don't think we do either. It's kind of interesting when I work with folks, training them around communication. Really, the foundation of where we start is, can they look at themselves and see where they struggle or where their faults are around communication? So, in a sense, the first thing I do is I take a mirror and I put it up in front of their face. Because if they can't see that, then I can't help them. And sometimes with people during the entire program, that's all I'm doing is putting up a mirror. And we actually don't take any action. That's because I can't move forward unless they're willing to look
Hmm.
for different reasons. I think it goes really deep on why a lot of people don't want to look into that mirror. And of course, it's uncomfortable and it's painful and it's not very fun. But until they will look and see what's in that mirror, I hardly can even teach them anything. So I
Yeah.
just keep pointing at the mirror.
Yeah, there has to be a willingness to look inside of yourself for the results. It could be it could be the very key itself to personal success. You read it all the time. I don't care if you're reading a self-help book or if you're reading a business help book, those types of things. You see about it. You talk about the most successful people on the planet, and what they were willing to do was work through their own shortcomings. It was ultimate responsibility, ultimate accountability for the failures in their life, right? And of course, you can redefine failure to say, hey, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is a learning experience. If you define failure as the end, guess what? It is the end for you. But if you define failure as a stepping stone, you define that mistake as a way to move forward, now you've got something to work with. But unfortunately, I feel like we've become adept at applying excuses, applying blame, and applying all these different tools to basically take that mirror and turn it around so you don't have to look at yourself, You don't want to look at it. And so we've got too many tools to figure out how to, you know, shirk the responsibility there, pass it on, pass the buck to somebody else. Ultimately, I think in our industry, if we would find a way, and that's why I appreciate what you do, find a way to communicate in a good way how we can build on things, the better off we're going to be, the better the industry gets, the better your team gets. Again, you start to narrow down the focus, right? This nebulous idea that we're all going to be great and we're going to communicate better is that's not real. It actually starts with the individual.
Yeah. Along those same lines, how I define feedback is it's other people trying to help you avoid future pain. And it's interesting because with feedback, we can so quickly get so defensive. I remember going to my CFO one time with essentially a plan on, it was a part of a recruiting plan we were doing. And I had asked him, word for word, can you give me some feedback on this? And so he was looking through it and he started to give me his feedback. And my instant response was to get defensive. And so I started defending everything that he was telling me. And he looked at me and he said, Andy, if you're asking for feedback, um, why aren't you listening to what I'm saying? Why do you even want the feedback? I'm like, ooh, good point. If the feedback's coming from somebody that like truly does care about you and they really want to help, they're just trying to help you avoid future pain. So why get defensive?
Most people don't. Maybe they recognize it at church on Sundays when the minister's up there kind of saying his piece about, by the way, this happened. Do you fit this mold? Is this happening to you? And sometimes you have that whatever that come to Jesus moment. But a lot of times during the week, Monday through Saturday, maybe you don't look at yourself in the same light, right? maybe it's because it's not coming from a source of recognition that you're willing to accept. Maybe it's coming from somebody that you don't like. You've got a misconception about their intention.
Yep.
And again, once you come into the room with that preconceived notion, you've already defeated the whole purpose of the conversation.
Yeah. No, I agree. In your opinion, how do you help people embrace that pain of looking at themselves and self-reflection and self-knowledge? And
I think, well, I think you have to find commonality. Everybody faces those pains, those trials, right? Most people think that they're facing it alone, right? Or that they are the only ones that have gone through it, even though they probably know ultimately that other people have been down this road. And a lot of roads have traveled. A lot of folks have been down this road, whatever that problem is. And, people relate to other folks who have been through those trials and how, they've gotten out of those dark days, or how they've overcome challenges, maybe even just by where they are, right? That's why I think a lot of times when it comes to executives, people in leadership positions, a good leader can relate because they've got stories, when they were, I've got a lot of stories from 30 years of being in this business of, oh yeah, I've been there before. I remember this one time. And people can relate to that. And that, again, I think that opens the door to then sharing something that you have in common. And I think that connection from, leadership to, folks that are wanting to break through, or you find potential in somebody but they're just struggling with something, getting to what they're struggling to starts with what you do. It starts with good communication. It starts with learning how to talk to one another, learning, the best ways to improve our situation by saying, hey, you're not the only one, right? And guess what? I had a similar experience. But again, that's a one-on-one interaction. That's not a nebulous, that's not a book that says, by the way, if you want to correct your whole life, this works for everybody. It doesn't work that way. We're all on a journey, a personal journey, sharing, having a human experience. And it's very, very unique for everyone. And that's what's so fascinating. When you work with people, it's better when it's one-on-one, right? Because you feel like you've made, like your experiences with a group when you're dropping, not, I'm going to drop some knowledge on you today, but you're talking to a whole group. What happens? It feels a little empty, right? But man, if you can get one-on-one with somebody or get a couple people in a room when it's a smaller group, man, that's real connection. That's real understanding.
yeah, in almost all of my programs, I mean, I have the knowledge dump days, classroom days, but then I meet with each individual anywhere maybe around 8 times one-on-one over the course of several months. And the idea is, to put it simply, is to help implement what they learned in the classroom into their real life. But really what we're doing is digging a little deeper to try to understand why they're behaving the way that they're behaving. So if somebody can't look in the mirror, it's not just because they don't want to. I think there's some sort of defense mechanism. And I'm not a mental health therapist. I don't do therapy with people, but getting them to understand that it is a defense mechanism and you can do it and still be safe. Like look in the mirror. And safe is kind of a fluffy word, but you can say it's fluffy, but then most people don't do it. So, because they don't feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're tense in the situation. Again, most people, especially, again, we're talking about blue collar, hardworking folks where being like, you're not going to find that truck. You're not going to find a construction truck at a psychologist's office or a psychiatrist's office. You're just not, you know,
Mhm.
you're not going to see motorcycles at a psychologist, a psychiatrist's office, whatever. You're not going to find that. Go there. That's not what they consider. You're going to find them at a bar. You're going to find them at the gun range. You're going to find them out hunting. You're going to see them out fishing. Those are the place. Those are their spaces. it's not one-on-one in an office or, those types of things where they feel like that's not their comfort zone. So how do you get around that? We've been talking about this, but I thought it was interesting how you actually got into just doing this. I want you to kind of tell your story a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I worked for a construction company. I started working in the shop actually, and from there went to project management, and then there went worked in HR for a little bit as well. But how I got into what I'm doing now was from my own pain. Meaning I would go to meetings, whether it was with the leadership team or with other people, and we would have these problems, particularly with people that we struggled to solve. And so me and all my mighty glory, I would start pushing and pushing and pushing to get these problems to get solved. And my pushing made the problems worse, not better. And I learned pretty quickly. Well, I don't know if it's quickly, but I learned with time that I myself didn't know how to even communicate the problem to the rest of the company. And so me coming in to the leadership team and saying things like, we need to do this or everybody's going to quit. Like that's not an effective line to drop. It's not specific. It's not a solution necessarily. It's not realistic, probably. And so, on the other hand, oftentimes we just ignore those tougher conversations, bury our head in the sand, and then the problem really doesn't go away. So where it all started with me, it wasn't so much the soft or the fluffy. It was there was problems that would continue to fester, and it just irritated me. Like I'd get angry. I'm like, why are we still talking about this? We brought this up 3 months ago. Why is this still a problem? We're very capable of making it go away. Well, a lot of times those problems are uncomfortable to deal with, especially if it's with the person. You have a project manager that's struggling in different areas, and so the job's losing money. Of course, from a leadership standpoint, the job's losing money. That's a red flag. We need to do something about it. Well, what if the problem's the project manager? What if the project manager's been there for 15 years? Like, then what? What if the project manager's buddies with the owner? Then what? There's all these, you get people involved and it gets kind of complicated. So, yeah, it's being able to learn the skills to get into those uncomfortable situations and not make them worse.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because then you created a career out of learning how to, you know, techniques, I guess, and teaching people techniques on how to get past those very things. I think, the things that you mentioned, when you start to have like, I owned my own company for a while, the company grew very, very quickly, recognized those growing pains, right? Every company that starts out, I mean, obviously you start to do a good job, you hire some good people, and then you start to see attitudes and characters, you know, sometimes begin to gel and then sometimes begin to, butt heads. And then, wow, it affects your growth. It affects your track, right? And leadership looks at it, as I looked at it, was like, okay, how do I address this? How do I fix this? Is it something I need to fix? Especially if you're a one man show kind of thing where you're not only the chief cook and bottle washer, you're also the guy that's out there having to, you know, solve those other problems. You're doing payroll, right? When you're running a small shop. But imagine that I can imagine that times 4 or 5 times. Now it starts to get really, portion for a leadership standpoint to go, okay, well now who's really responsible for this? How do you delegate that responsibility down to somebody that I need you to handle this problem and I need you to handle it well so that we get the work done, but we don't lose maybe a quality personnel or lose a bunch of quality personnel because we handled it.
Mhm.
So what made you decide is that like what did you decide to make the jump? Is like, look, I'm going to just do this full time. I'm going to do, I'm going to start Mavix and this is what I'm going to do. What made you start? How'd you make the jump?
Essentially, I didn't know how to do all of these things either with communication. So I set out to learn a lot of, I mean, in a lot of different ways. And eventually, I had built up somewhat of a curriculum or a training product. So I actually just started within my own network of people that I know and just said my first class was essentially free. I reached out to my network and said, "Hey, is anyone interested in coming to this class? I'm gonna do it in the evenings." And so, of course, some people came, took some pictures, threw some things out on that thing called LinkedIn, and it just slowly started to roll out from there. But I think what's helpful to know is these tough conversations aren't always big and bad and hairy. It could be as simple as you have a guy, maybe somebody that's transitioning to a foreman kind of, and he keeps bringing up that he wants a company truck, and he just like won't let it go, like a dog with a bone. The problem itself isn't that big, but it creates a lot of emotional toll on leadership, and they start to get frustrated. And they don't get frustrated at the issue; they get frustrated at the guy. And so, if we're talking about this in January and in March and April, I start to think, why in the world are we still talking about this truck and this guy? Tell him no. If the answer is no, tell him no. Or like, make that problem go away. Like, why are we like, dragging this thing out? And the thing is, like I said, the problem isn't that big of a deal, but it creates a lot of emotional toll on leadership, and it like just takes up a lot of brain space.
Yeah. Yeah. And those types of things, again, they can fester if they're not dealt with,
Right.
right? Especially if it's going on month after month after month. I think a lot of times, I'll say it in the skilled craftsman world, um, the whole right seat idea of, this person's in the right space doing a good job.
Yeah.
If you're good at your craft, it doesn't mean that you're good at leading. So that transition that you make, and this is a big deal, been through it, right? As an apprentice and then, kind of going through that whole process. I was like, yeah, I see that my superintendent or my foreman, they've got a truck. And if I'm going to be performing the foreman's functionalities like these guys are, you know what I mean? I, yeah, that's what I want. Right. Now, I may have only been at this company for, 2 years or whatever, but yeah, that's what I want. I'm good for that. They're great technicians, right? They're really, really good at their job, but then they're not really good at leading because they think that leading is like maybe the perks, right? But leading is not the perks. So you don't put you in a position to give you the truck that gives you authority. The truck doesn't give you anything other than transportation from point A to point B. It
Right.
doesn't give you authority, but I think that's the missing link there a little bit is the perks of the job, quote unquote, whatever that is, more pay, maybe a truck, whatever those are, don't give you the authority. And then suddenly you're thrust into this position and now you're an authority figure over maybe 2 to 5 to 10 people.
Hmm.
That's brand new and you have zero, especially younger guys, zero leadership skills. I mean, you have some innate leadership skills, but leadership skills, something to be trained, you know? And again, what you do at Mavix, learning how to communicate for optimal results is probably one of the biggest skills that you can learn. You can make a lot of friends, right?
Right.
Because
Oh, yeah.
you can have a lot of friends and people like you and all those kind of things, but it's not the same thing as leadership. It's not the same thing as being a foreman or a superintendent or a project manager. It's not the same. This is not the friendship business. This is business, and it's different. People approach it differently, you know. And some people confuse that level of, well, hey, man, I thought we were buddies, you know, especially if you have made some friends on a crew that they are now leading. Hey, I thought we were friends. We're buddies. You can't clock me in a little early, you know, I'm going to be about, 15, 20 minutes late every day, you know, it's all right. You know me. We're friends. Those are issues that you're not prepared to deal with, right? You're not prepared to deal with the corrective actions as a young person. So, therefore, what do you need? You need training. You need to know that you're not the only one that's ever dealt with this. You need to know that there are good ways to deal with it and bad ways to deal with it. What are the results of that? Again, it comes back to those soft costs, right? Are you going to get the ROI by putting this person through training? I say yes, you are. It might be slightly unrecognized, but what are you going to have? Well, you're going to have better trained people. Like, to your point, what if they stay? If they're not well trained, what if they stay? That's probably the worst outcome. But you're going to have better trained people, and they're then going to they're going to embrace that culture of Hey, we train people here. We pass on the knowledge. I saw one this morning on LinkedIn, a post about, you've got to step in, you've got to be a leader, you got to pass on the knowledge because really that's what leading is. It's really just passing on the knowledge about, hey, guess what? When you're in my position, this is the things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to give this same talk probably to somebody else that's coming up through, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But guess what? It's going to create another person that's maybe just like you, a potential leader that can then step into the role. Because if you're not training them, they're never going to really figure out how to advance or realize even that construction in itself, skilled trade is actually a career. You can make a living. You can make a living out of it, and you make a good life out of it too.
Yeah, no doubt. It's it probably happens in other industries other than construction, but particularly for construction, you go through an apprenticeship program, you learn your trade for 4 years, and then you're just plopped into a different job. It'd be like taking a 4-year program to learn how to be a flight attendant and then asking you to fly the plane. Like, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, not a good idea at all. Yeah, I sometimes, wonder why the statistics are the same, and not to say that they're always correct, but I wonder why we continue kind of as an industry maybe to make some of the same mistakes. And I think what comes down to is doing things like, what you do, Andy, is, when you start to train a little bit as an industry as a whole, there's probably going to be probably an overall, margin of error, right? But as an individual company, and I said that's what you have to get down to. If you're a company leader and you want to start making improvements, well, guess what? The improvements aren't going to come in big chunks, right? They're going to come with doing things like what you do. They're going to come with making small improvements to a couple of folks over here, making some small improvements to a couple things over here. Train them up a little bit better. Be interested in exactly what their life is about a little bit. Be a
Mhm.
leader. Tell your stories. Let them be relatable, right? They'll catch on, right? So that's it. I thought it was interesting, and I know we've run through some quick time here, doing this and having a great conversation. But I find what you do important and interesting. Can you let the folks know out there, like, how do you get a hold of you? How do you talk to Mavix? How do they talk to you? How do they get your service? Tell us about that real quick before we got to sign off.
Yeah. Quick ways to go to the website, mavixcoaching.com. Go to the homepage. I actually have free training. That's about 90 minutes of videos on how to have hard conversation. It was the curriculum was designed specifically for blue collar folks. So you go to the website, click on the homepage. There's a button there. Before you talk to me, check out that free stuff first. See if it's anything you'd even be interested in. And of course, from the website too, you can book a call or contact me through there.
Andy, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'm glad that we've actually had a chance to meet. We haven't met in person, but we've met via LinkedIn and here online. So I'll be reaching out in the future. Obviously, stay in touch about things and kind of see how things are going. If there's anything new or interesting, I want you to reach out to me as well.
Yeah, you betcha. I will.
Great talking to you today. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Have a
thank you.
have a great weekend.
You too.